everyone. Welcome to a new edition of The Panel. This is the Citizens Panel, which you will be hearing from and watching several times a month. Our first guests today are Ambassador N.K. Bhadrakumar, who's retired from the Indian Foreign Service. He writes regularly, and you must be reading him. He's one of the most sharp analysts on foreign policy. Our second guest is Professor Anuradha Chinoy, who was earlier the dean in Jawaharlal Nehru University of the School of International Studies and is now the adjunct professor in Jindal University. And she is a well-known expert on Russia, and we are going to get their expertise across to you, I hope, in the coming half an hour. So welcome, both of you. And we will start immediately with the first question that, we just had a meeting. I think it's all in our minds now that Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines. And what do you make of that, Ambassador Bhadrakumar? Do you think that that's going to herald some new relations and new developments ahead? Or is it more of the same and it was expected?
Well, from the clippings, Seema, I really, first of all, I must thank you for this honor that you start a new program, and Anu and I are being fielded in the first episode.
Couldn't think of anyone better.
Wish you all the best. Now, as regards this meeting didn't take place, as you know. There was no meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS. There was an encounter. You can say there was an interaction,
okay,
which is inevitable, because when 5 leaders are meeting and are spending 48 hours together, formally, informally, and so on, they're bound to have eye contact, exchange pleasantries, and so on. So I think the briefing probably conveyed an impression that there was a meeting, the briefing from the Indian side.
It did, absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't think that was exactly what happened. There must have been an exchange of opinion, or something may have been asked and something was reacted to, or whatever. So it's difficult to, except in a structured conversation, it's difficult to draw, and the readout that followed, it's difficult to draw conclusions. The establishment analysts here have already hastened to criticize or distance themselves from the Chinese version. I saw in the social media. So, which means that the atmospherics couldn't be sustained even for the next 24 hours. So, in substantive terms, therefore, I remain deeply skeptical whether the ground has shifted meaningfully at all.
Okay.
That is the first point. The second point is this, that the last Corps Commanders Conference, the meeting, was rather unusual in the sense that it got into a second day. I don't think that this had happened before. It's the first time I think there's a 2-day meeting. There was, of course, again, we have reverted back to the earlier time of a joint statement, which means that there is a certain kind of positive vibe that the two sides are interested in conveying. So that is there. And then there are certain expressions which were used there, that expeditiously resolved and so on. That gives reason to hope. But to what extent, fundamentally, I think the differences remain. That we say that the relationship cannot move forward unless this is resolved. And now, what is it that is to be resolved? There is a profound difference of opinion. There are two narratives from the
Right.
Indian and the Chinese side. And both, in a way, are devolving upon the sovereignty question. And sovereignty question is very important for China too. So I don't know whether a forward movement is likely or not. Then the second thing is the political climate in India. Whichever way this moves forward, it is bound to be controversial. And we are just about entering the election cycle,
Right.
when the instinct of the leadership would be to um, not generate controversies that may become the stuff of criticism and may impact, So there will be a certain kind of a reserve on the extent to which a compromising stance, a flexibility should be taken, could be taken,
Right.
so on. So I really don't know. I'm not very hopeful. I really think that, let me sum it up this way, that this relationship I see can move forward because I have always held the view that Prime Minister Modi himself has a good understanding of China. He has been to China a few times even before he became Prime Minister, and he has his opinion on China. And we have seen that even on the rhetorical side, that Prime Minister has not got into any kind of rhetorical statements about China. So there is reason to hope that an awareness is there at the highest level that without normalizing this relationship, India's foreign policy and diplomacy cannot be optimal. So I think that the question is about the timeline. We'll need to wait till assume, first of all, that this government gets re-elected. And if it gets re-elected, I personally think that, that the prospects are good, bad, either way you can say it, but it remains to be seen. Indian politics is highly unpredictable.
So, yeah.
And then in the second half of next year, if this government comes back with a very good majority, a strong majority, and difficult decisions can be taken, I think there is cause for optimism, because that is the time from when Mr. Modi might look for a legacy. And this subject is likely to be addressed.
Well, there's a lot that will happen between now and the next year, I think. So I'm just going to take a little bit of what you raised with that, this thing of elections coming up, etc. So the China component already seems to have been dragged into some of the local politics around, as they move now. You had Rahul Gandhi saying that, asking why the Prime Minister did not raise the issue about Chinese intrusion into Indian territory. And you have China coming up every now and again, whenever the politicians talk or whenever the opposition or the ruling party want to squabble. So do you think that this meeting on this, this nod on the side of BRICS, on the sidelines of BRICS, is basically to prepare the way for a G20 attendance? Or do you see a little bit more into it?
Well, three things. One, on the issue of China and Pakistan, India, and of course, these countries also have, especially but India, because it's a competitive multi-party system, there is a competitive nationalism. So if the government takes a position, the opposition will obviously goad it further, and there are different, whether it's Pakistan. And so that stalls very often the improvement of talks. Yeah. Second, I agree a lot with what Ambassador Kumar just said, that the real change can only come when there's a change on the ground. But having said that, there are two things, opinions which I have, which are different. And one is, I think the fact that now it's recorded that it came from Mr. Modi himself saying that he would like to see a change and an approach which goes towards some kind of better resolution in the talks. And the fact that Xi Jinping also responded positively, I think it gives a bit more hope. So I agree with this issue of a bit more hope than earlier, even though if it was a one-line exchange. Second, I think the current geopolitics is such, given the way America is moving into, pushing for Taiwan and greater militarization in the what they call the Indo-Pacific and we call Asia-Pacific, uh, it's a better geopolitical situation for us where China is being put pressure on. So this is a time where they might want to not have new or exacerbate old animosities, whether it's with us or in the South China Sea with Vietnam, etc. So because they need all their forces to contend with the US, so that might be so. For everything, there are multiple factors. So I think these are also additional factors. And as far as India is concerned, we have seen a period of growth which can go backwards if there is any war or tension. Even though it might be politically expedient, people tend to win elections at the time of hyper-nationalism, war, etc. It's not good for the overall economy or people. So these
Right.
are issues, but what will come as a balance of forces, I mean, one can't really tell. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So, Ambassador, you had, I think, also written, I mean, sort of hinted at and written in some of your columns about the Americans and they deciding to sort of look away from India on the issue of Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine, they're stressing with everyone, but where we are concerned, they're not stressing it because they're keeping us really for China, and they would rather keep India as a sort of a block against China and Chinese expansion or whatever in the region. Now, what do you think, how is Washington going to react to all the developments that you both have touched on and India's own position vis-a-vis Russia and China? And Biden, I believe, is coming a day before for G20. So he's going to be coming here. And I think you've written that he'll come and twist the Prime Minister's arms, as it were. Or I think Said Naqvi wrote that. Said Naqvi wrote that. And try and get his own way on China. So do you see that happening? Do you see this kind of play out of hard politics around G20?
That there has been a paradigm shift in the sense that that this politics of what is it called, heft, is it, what is it called, there is an expression for it, that you are trying to anyway, the earlier position was different insofar as today India is, as Anu has said, India is rather relatively better placed. Economy is, much better than most countries in the world. The dynamic, the momentum. Secondly, the kind of geopolitical milieu that is developed here is in the world order and in the international system. Simply put, we are getting more space for negotiating, So that is to our advantage. We can take advantage. Whether we take advantage or not is a different thing. I'm just objectively assessing the situation, the correlation of forces, as it were. And therefore, India can extract opportunities out of this. And even with the United States, I think that is the kind of impetus that we have. It is not as if we are acting under pressure. And I don't know to what extent it is also even with an eye on our China problem, bilateral China problem. Now, what I was trying to say is that, we're really not, for the first time, we're really not under pressure from, of course, Russians are never, intrusive, and, there's no question of the Russian side pressuring us. As Anu rightly said, China has its hands full, and it's not in China's interest to have another front with any neighboring country at this point in time. But that doesn't mean, I must have a small difference of opinion there. But that doesn't mean that, that I think that China will compromise, because it will be precedent setting. And politics is largely also about perceptions. And a lot of other countries in China's neighborhood will get perceptions which from Chinese point of view would be misperceptions. So that is also a point that I don't think that because the South China Sea or because the Taiwan issue is hotting up, I don't think that that is any reason for China to show flexibility, because Chinese style of diplomacy is about taking principled positions. And then there is remarkable consistency for a long period of time in holding on to that position. So I don't think that will happen. But here the important thing is this, that the peace and tranquility on the border, I think the two sides are genuinely interested in keeping it. And neither will therefore upset the apple cart. That is one thing. The second point is this, that, that we are really not plunging into the geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. The United States is going on a path that may well lead to a conflict. And I don't see at all India getting embroiled in that, entangled in that in any way. And therefore, I think the comfort level on the Chinese side would be rather there. They understand the importance that India ascribes to its strategic autonomy. And their commentators always comment on it, saying that India is ultimately not going to sell out at all, because it is a country with its own dreams, its own vision, and its own core interests to preserve. But what we are doing, therefore, is that as a result of this rise in temperature in the relationship between China and the US, a number of windows of opportunities are opening. For example, even the chips. If there is going to be a large-scale relocation of or reforging of the supply chain, India has big ambitions about chip industry. It's not very easy, but it doesn't stop India from dreaming about big things as a big player in the international arena, artificial intelligence and all that kind of thing, quantum computing and all that. Now, therefore, when if this relocation takes place and a kind of supply chain builds up, we have high hopes that we will be spotted as a likely partner. I have doubts whether this is a realistic assumption on our part. This assumption is realistic rather on our part, because even with the close allies like the Europeans or the British, for example, Rishi Sunak went to the US, in fact, with this very much in mind, that Britain would like to have a special relationship with the United States on developing artificial intelligence and so on. But Biden didn't give any kind of assurances of that kind. And Biden, on the other hand, is negotiating with the Europeans also,
Right.
So you see, the French are quite upset about it. In fact, the way the Americans are going about this. So, that being the state of play, why should they give it to India? And then the second aspect is that, that in terms of infrastructure, it's one thing to dream about. The second one is whether the business climate is found attractive enough by the American businessman, because they will put money on the table, and it's a very big involvement. Only if they are convinced that they could do it. And you see, even the Tesla, the electric car business, it has taken so much time. And Elon Musk is not in a tearing hurry to do that. It may happen, and it will happen because India is a big market. But that's a different thing. So you see, all this taken into account, the hopes that are raised during Mr. Modi's visit to the US, I have no doubt whether it is going to be realized, they are going to be realized. Primarily, it is still a relationship which is related on military sales, where the Americans are genuinely interested, and India is a big market and all that. Qualitatively, whether it has changed or not, I really do not know. So this three-way cycle, ultimately, India will have to create a forward movement of the bilateral track. I don't think that China is going to be very much impressed by the fact that India has a qualitatively high level of relationship today with the United States. That is not going to be a motivating factor for China.
Right. So, Anu, you had spoken a little bit on Pakistan, so bringing it a little closer home. Now the Americans seem to be taking interest in Pakistan again, now that Imran Khan is out of the way. So how is that going to impact on relations in South Asia, America, India? Because Bangladesh also has issues, and all the region has gone closer also to China over the years. So there's a lot going on diplomatically in South Asia itself.
You know, if what you have in mind is in terms of regional isolation, I have my doubt whether India faces that risk of regional isolation. You're absolutely right that the trajectory that Indian foreign policy is taking is not a shared trajectory in the sense that the other South Asian countries are moving on other tracks. You know,
Right.
China definitely is a very big factor for the other neighboring countries. But that said, you know, the kind of reordering of the world politics that is underway now in the post-American century that is lying ahead, I believe it is a post-American century, and in the kind of multipolarity that is developing in the world order. You see, the thing is, we are, as Indians, we have very strong feelings sometimes about our own government, differences of opinion about what is happening in our country. And we have a discontent. And, you know, we look at, therefore, you know, the performance of the government, you know, performance of the country through that prism. But if you slightly move away from that, you will find that India's prestige internationally is a factor today. And there's no denying that. And you know, all these things, you know, are like, you know, even the fact of, you know, this lunar mission has succeeded. It's an imprint is put on the history of science. Huh? It's nothing less than that. It's very significant. So how does it really play in the international opinion? Therefore, India is a factor. India is, even in the BRICS, we saw that the attempt is to carry India along. And India also on its part is, I think, is astutely playing. Like,
So,
like you take, for instance, the BRICS summit. The BRICS summit has gone against American interests on the whole, because the de-dollarization process has begun. Now, the BRICS currency, I feel that the BRICS currency part is also going to get momentum next year, and fortuitously for Russia, China, the next 3 years, the BRICS chairmanship is going to be in the hands of countries which are stakeholders in a BRICS currency, who are stakeholders in de-dollarization. That is, I'm including Brazil also in that. Now, these 3 countries are going to head this.
right.
And I am very sure that Indian diplomats are attuned to these things, and the kind of position that India has taken with regard to the BRICS expansion. I am mentioning this specifically because the point is Indian foreign policy and diplomacy has become quite flexible.
Right.
As I said, it's not.
So Anuradha was going to, I want to take you back also to the South Asian point, Anuradha, before talking about the expansion of BRICS. So tell me a little bit about Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and all the relations that are playing out and all kinds of different contrary signals sometimes we receive as laypersons.
Well, look, on Pakistan, I think all of you might have read that article which the Americans did not deny, that they had a hand in pulling the Imran Khan government down. And neither Pakistan denied it, nor did the Americans, but it
Yeah, we're losing you.
was all over the press, which actually shows the reason they did it was because Imran Khan was trying to carve out a slightly strategic autonomous place for Pakistan, balancing between Pakistan, the US, China, and Russia. So the Americans, of course, they never left they cannot leave Pakistan because it would be open to giving it on a platter to China. And I think by its nature now, given its economic problems, Pakistan is destined to be a client state, either of China or America, but very often they do try to balance with Saudi Arabia and their problem with Iran, etc. So the Americans are fully back into trying to manipulate Pakistan, in my opinion, from whatever I've been reading. It's just all this, a lot of stuff which I keep reading on these countries. And China was not too happy about this, that the Pakistan military actually used this and got rid of Imran, which shows that they're not fully, they can go against Chinese interest also, because China does not intervene, but they would like stability in Pakistan. And Pakistan today is very unstable and deeply indebted and huge conditionalities to the IMF.
Right.
Similarly, Bangladesh, the Americans have put a lot of pressure on Bangladesh because they were building these nuclear plants with Russian help. And the Americans straight off said they would sanction Bangladesh if they took in nuclear fuel, which the Russian ships were actually almost at the stage of docking when they were turned back. So I recently read, and you can confirm it, that China said that they would support Bangladesh if they wanted to counter any external influence. So there is, in the region also things are hotting up. Of course, India sees the fact of Bangladesh and Nepal and Pakistan and Sri Lanka, they all have their own autonomous, independent relations with China. And they also leverage these to improve what they want to get from India. So everyone is playing the same game, balancing, leveraging, trying to take advantage of the two great powers in this region. But it depends. And there's another point about China, I think currently, because Xi Jinping's theoretization, he wants to be a theoretician like Mao was, or Deng. And he brought out these 3 papers, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Development Initiative, and that critique. And he keeps in that, that was a basis for his rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, where he said that these issues can be resolved through negotiations. And I think the reply from our foreign minister was quite good. He said, how about doing it here also?
Yeah.
Resolving India-China, what you're saying in your theorization. So really, I think China could accept some kind of status quo. Yeah.
Yeah, so the ambassador spoke of the expansion of BRICS, which is quite exciting, given the fact that Saudi Arabia, Iran, etc., found another platform to work together. Now, how do you see that? Do you see this as something which is strengthening the Chinese, Russian, Indian, the BRICS coalition, as it were, and working against America? Or do you feel that nobody has to be worried about this? I was asking Anuradha.
I think this expansion is very welcome, despite whatever the entanglements. I don't want to go into them, that who wanted more, who wanted less. Ultimately, it was a compromise, and I think it's a good compromise. And what's interesting, I think, and most important in this is 2 things I'd say. One is it really makes BRICS plus OPEC converge. All the countries who have joined are oil producers. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran. And so therefore, the potential for the economic exchange and in their own currencies, which has also been simultaneously been initiated, will actually pick up with this. Right. And why I am quite clear this is so is because of what Lavrov said. When the Indians said that, there was a press report, and I don't know, because I don't fully always agree with one never knows about our Indian press sometimes. Sorry to say that, but they said that India had doubts. Yeah, India had doubts about 3 Arab countries joining, not Iran. Iran, they had already promised, because when the Iranian foreign minister came here, India said that they would be supporting Iran in BRICS. But about the other three Arab countries. But Lavrov apparently intervened and told probably the PM and the FM that look at the economic benefits of these and the oil and gas revenues which come, which can be exchanged through BRICS platforms. So to which they immediately saw sense and agreed. So this is, so both these kind of things, I mean, I think it's excellent that this has happened. And next year, even more can join.
Right. Ambassador, do you agree with that? Do you think this is a good expansion? And how is it going to strengthen BRICS as a major entity, international grouping in the world?
You see, the point is the Russians have a tactic and a strategy. This, what Anu mentioned, is a tactical thing to get India on board. But nonetheless, the fact is there is a strategy. This expansion, I clearly see as the first step towards undoing of the 1945 deal of oil for security between President Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz. We know well that petrodollar phenomenon is a byproduct of the commitment given by Saudi Arabia that oil would be traded in dollars, which necessitates for all countries keeping their reserves in dollars, because most countries need oil. Now, that led to the world currency status for the dollar, which in turn has allowed the Americans to live a larger-than-life lifestyle, maintain, just print notes defying all economic rules of, when you make notes and print currency and spend it, you must have assets to back it up. That's a fundamental principle in economics. Now, Americans could do that. And that, in other words, is quintessentially the basis of the American hegemony, that it could get away with this. So Putin has spoken at length about it. But the fact is, the single biggest outcome of the Ukraine war, in my opinion, is going to be this de-dollarization. And the Russian strategy is very, very clear-cut. Putin has made it very clear that the Americans will pay a very heavy price right at the beginning when they spoke about the sanctions from hell, that they will live to regret the fact that Russia has been kicked out of, evicted from the SWIFT system. Now, Russia has no other alternative, and a country that is so rich in commodities, and commodities are required by all countries, it cannot be isolated. And we have seen it that the sanctions have failed, and Russian economy is showing growth again. And therefore, the BRICS expansion, I see as as unavoidable first step towards the revamping of the trading system, and the kind of trading system that existed in the world for the last 4 centuries, which led to the huge transfer of resources to the Western countries and their present, creating their present level of prosperity. That is going to be eroded. A new trading system will come, and part of that will be the currency in which this trade will take place, and therefore it will completely, phenomenally change the international financial architecture. And what Anu said is very right, but I look at it slightly differently, that these 3 countries, heavyweights from the Gulf, these 3 countries which have been brought in, look at it. Russia and Iran are the 2 top superpowers in the field of gas resource in the world. Now, Russia and Saudi Arabia alone account for a quarter of the world's oil production. This is the state of play, and another 6 to 7% for UAE. So can you can very well imagine that the new formation that is taking place, And where is it going to go to? There is, I don't know whether India needed much urging by Lavrov to see where things are going. This is why I said that India is astutely playing. Because, you know, the decision to trade in rupee with UAE's oil was taken even before the BRICS meeting. Now, so you see the willingness on the part of these Gulf countries to move away from dollar, and Iran has always been demanding this. Saudi Arabia is inclined towards that. So you see the next step by bringing them on board the BRICS, the Russian game plan, the Russian strategy is to take a great leap forward. And instead of getting entangled in this pedantic debate about whether it's feasible to have a BRICS currency or not, the momentum is building up. And, you know, I read a very interesting interview. You know, sometimes we underestimate the leaders of small countries who are much more clued in. And one such person is Lukashenko. I always believe that, you know, that you can learn a lot, in fact, whether it is Prigozhin or anything, by following the Belarus press and Lukashenko's statements. So Lukashenko said this, in fact, that the first step has been taken toward de-dollarization. So you see, the expansion has to be seen from that point of view. And then there are other things thrown in. Brazil was opposed to expansion as an idea. Therefore, the fact that, you know, that they brought in Argentina, Brazil is terribly interested in stabilizing its relations with Argentina, which has been one of rivalry in the recent years. So bringing Argentina on board meant that Brazil became a stakeholder in this expansion business. And similarly, Russians have brought in Ethiopia, and which is a gateway into Africa. And another gateway is from the point of view of regional connectivity is Egypt. And Egypt's policies are increasingly going toward that earlier time, the Soviet era time. A very strong foundation always existed between Russia and Egypt. Even after Sadat, you know, it continued that because Arab nationalism attributed a special place for Russia in their worldview. So the Putin's time, Putin and Sisi have consolidated that relationship, which is below the radar, so no one notices it. Both are pragmatists, but it's a very solid relationship today. Now, you know, for the Africa summit, a big presence there was of President Sisi, you know. So you see, so now you have from Africa, you have Egypt, I count it as an African country, then Ethiopia, a country of immense potential, and a very large country, 110 million people population, very strong agriculture, and it's again a gateway. Then South Africa. And you know, I was writing about this today. I went through the archival material and I found that in the space of this 18 months or whatever, since the special operations began in Ukraine, Lavrov was in Pretoria 4 times. Can you imagine? 4 times. So what is it that is shaping up? And similarly, the South African president was this year in Russia twice already. So you see the inroads, you know, that's what I'm saying. Russians have got, it's a great power, and it's got a historical memory. It's very rich in diplomacy, the art of diplomacy. So the BRICS has been therefore a turning point. Lukashenko spotted this. Lukashenko said, in fact, that a very significant step has been taken toward these processes.
So it's very clear that, I mean, from what you've said, and it's sort of taking us to another level altogether, that the Americans also would be worried and very aware of the fact
Absolutely.
that it's major, right?
Absolutely.
So, to bring it down, I mean, I'm now sort of nearing the end of this discussion, so I want to bring it down to what you could even say pedantic, but it's something that's going to impact on everybody in the country next year when the elections are held. The Americans always raise these lofty ideas of democracy when they want to subdue nations or when they want to protest on a particular track. They did Khashoggi with Saudi Arabia, didn't manage for too long, but they did do it. With us, the international religious freedoms body is continuously saying and intervening. Do you think that we're going to see a lot more of that, of violations of democracy, as it were, being raised by the Americans as we go into the elections? Or do you think that they have no way out of it? Anuradha, you want to start that? Then I'll end with the ambassador.
Well, you see, this whole the American discourse on democracy is completely linked to their interest.
Yeah.
So they calibrate it. They'll have one, some national endowment for democracy funded think tank say something on the lack of press freedoms and the issue of there's no dissent in India, which is, there are clear indications of that, and there's evidence about it. On the other hand, the Biden has said, oh, there's a great democracy.
Yeah.
So, it depends on what we give them and what they get out of it. So, of course, so they'll be playing both sides because their deep state has many fingers. So someone will be saying one thing and the state officially will be Blinken, and Biden could say another thing. If we give them, 25 new Boeing jets, and they'll say, oh, it's the most wonderful democracy. And that's how they function. So, I mean, I don't think one should rely on the US for anything, quite frankly. They're the biggest imperialist power. And one interesting thing is that, the question you asked earlier about their reaction to BRICS, I think they're hating every minute of it. Because you can see just before the BRICS meeting, they told Saudi Arabia, withdraw your membership deal and we will help you get nuclear. They can go to that extent, which the Saudis did not accept. So you can imagine even they finally got a backbone.
Right. Right. So what do you think, Ambassador? We'll end with you.
Well, I couldn't agree with Anu more, because, the point is the entire hegemony, global hegemony, is pinned on this, is riveted on this, the dollar's primacy, and the kind of immense, seamless purchasing power that it provided the United States. And they must be not worried, they must be really frightened that the process is gathering momentum and a critical mass is developing after this BRICS summit. Because if this proceeds further, and the point is, this Americans are responsible ultimately for their undoing. When they weaponized sanctions to this dollar, in the nature of sanctions to this extent, Anu mentioned about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has every reason to feel nervous, because if tomorrow there is a problem, and the Americans have threatened the UAE with sanctions, that Americans have threatened the UAE with sanctions. So you see, tomorrow, what Russia has gone through, this $300 billion reserves, is nothing compared to what the petrodollar states have got. Their reserves are all kept in the Western banks. So you see, they are very afraid. And they generate income. They generate income, and they put it in the Western banking system. And then, if things don't go well with the Americans, one day they are said that you can't have access to it. So so you see, the thing is, I think that is why I mentioned about the tactic and the strategy, because you see, behind the scene, a lot of conversation has been going on between the Russians and the Chinese on the one side, and the Arab countries and the Gulf countries in particular have been going on. And this is not something which began yesterday or day before yesterday. OPEC Plus has its origin traceable to 2017. This is the 6th year. Now, you see, so this much of conversation has been going on between the Saudis and the Russians. So, the Russians have drawn the conclusion, there is very definite reading of the situation that once this BRICS membership is straightened out, they can get on with the real business. And as far as India is concerned, the Russians know India, the Russians know how to handle India, and the Russians know never to pressurize India. And the Russians know that it is always advisable for decisions to be taken by Delhi, which have the appearance that they are Delhi's decisions, and they might as well be Russia's decisions too. So, so you see, the way I see, therefore, the BRICS developing and India's policy adjusting itself, as we saw in Johannesburg, India fell in line, very smoothly. And the Modi's remarks about the democratization of the world order is very, very satisfying. There is, and this immediately after the visit to the US and immediately before Biden's visit to India. So you can draw conclusions.
Right, right. So thank you very much, both of you. It was very informative and interesting. And I learned a lot in the process. Thank you. And we'll see you again.